black woman.
Welcome to I'm Just Saying, two black women with opinions, where we engage in candid and powerful conversations with extraordinary women leading change. In today's episode, we have the privilege of speaking with Norma Wong, an indigenous Hawaiian leader, Zen master, and thought leader. She's the author of When No Thing Works, a book that challenges us to think beyond crisis and collapse, inviting us to imagine and create a future where we can all live into. Norma has spent decades advocating for community wellness, sharing her wisdom and expertise through her work in resilience, leadership, and what it means to be a good ancestor. Join us as Jan dives deep with Norma on her journey, her philosophy, and the transformative power of ancestral wisdom.
Today, I am absolutely delighted to be in conversation with Norma Wong, who has a book called When No Thing Works, not to be confused with nothing, but when no thing works. One of her stickers for the book says, "Be a good ancestor." And another says, "Breathe. Take a step, pause." So we will be talking about when no thing works and how to be a good ancestor today, or what the alternative is. A horrible example of that. Good afternoon, Norma. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Jeanette. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be with you, although I am so sorry that we weren't able to do this in person. I know we were actually together just a little while ago, but you know how these things go, Los Angeles being what it is.
Los Angeles is what it is. It moves fast. I was born and raised in Chicago, and my brother warned me when I moved to California about how fast things move, that you can barely grab onto them. And that's the difference between the East Coast. They move a little slower or a little faster, maybe, but you can hold on to it. You can hold on to something. So how does life move in Hawaii, where you're located?
Well, here we move much slower, but we also have like a different relationship with time, I think, because that is the case. So we mark the passage of every day, and we have this notion about the future and the past being part of what our responsibility is at any given time. So, yes, and the farther you go into the Pacific, the slower it is. So, Hawaii would be, well, not quite Los Angeles to Hawaii, but we would be at a faster pace than farther into the Pacific.
Okay, that makes sense. But it also makes sense, I think, to think about time and to think about how we treat time. I think that the current dominant society would have us think that time rolls in a linear line forward ever. But maybe time doesn't. Maybe time is a circle.
No, time folds upon itself, or at least that's what the physicists say. So science, which is sadly not in demand by some folks who are leading the country right now, that science says that that time isn't what people think it is, that it's not linear, and that it's more like, you take a couple of balls of yarn and you throw them on the floor together, and that it indeed crosses over, but where it crosses over is not necessarily the end of it. So,
Nor the beginning.
nor the beginning.
Yeah. With that in mind, then how do we position ourselves to be good ancestors and good descendants?
Well, one is to have the humility to know that we're not the first, and we're hopefully will not be the last, and that there are many things that have occurred that we only have a partial story for. And so some of it is really about humility, but also having a sense of responsibility for the whole, including the descendants that are not yet born. To have a wonderment about what it is we can do that would make it easier, better, more fruitful. Even if we don't have children, I don't have children. Jeanette, I happen to know that you do. That I don't have children, but that doesn't mean I don't have descendants. And so that notion that in the one life you have responsibility for people who are not yet born.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I actually don't think one has to have children born of their womb to have an accountability to Earth and to humanity and to community. I think that this that you occupy space in this time and on this planet means that you have an accountability for it, for that space that you occupy. So
So it's a thing, though, that there are people who don't have that view. And it's a thing that right now we would be in a tight space between people who have that view and people who don't. So one can hope that we are in a cycle. But I think that this cycle feels different than some of the other cycles that we've had in the past. And therein, not only the danger, but also the real opportunity.
tell me more.
It's that, when we are not liking what's happening, but we can sort of live with it, then we're not as likely to make the big choices and the big leaps that would change things up. And so right now, when things are as fraught as it is, and that fraughtness is occurring at large scale, and to be frank, not only in this country, right, but happening all over the world, that it breeds the conditions for us to be in a spot where, where it's like the term I believe that's being used now is, they call it polycrisis, right? Many crises occurring at the same time.
Okay, that's new for me. We're in a polycrisis.
A polycrisis, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And but when there is this phenomena, then that shakes up things in a way where there's a chance that enough people will get up from their slumber around, just living with things as they are, and that will take larger chances around doing something about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's encouraging that people will take larger chances or endeavor to do something about this polycrisis that we find ourselves in. I do think there is a danger in this space, though, where people become paralyzed by fear and powerless by isolation.
Yes, there is, right? And that isolation is a thing that is multiplied by, a couple things. One is this country is built much more about the individual than it is about community. And the second is the prevalence of, going down the dark holes of social media, where we essentially just listen to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's and using that type of ways of communication without actually putting ourselves in front of people. And so there are ways in which isolation is self-imposed. And it is Jeanette, I'm meeting a lot of people who believe that where they are is something that is not felt by others. And so the irony of it is that I'm meeting many people. And so what it is the only thing that's isolating is that they don't know that other people exist. And that's the only thing that's isolating. So either, it's get out and be with people you love is really, really important right now, because isolation is part of the strategy.
Absolutely, isolation is part of the strategy, and I am concerned about social media also. I absolutely agree with you to get out and meet people or see people in person in terms of those who you love, those who you like, those who you should be getting to know in terms of having a conversation with, to see where there's agreement and see where we can go together, if it's possible, right? So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You wrote a book, When No Thing Works. And when we were in the same room, a young woman asked, why did you write this book? Or when did you know you wanted to become an author? And you gave her an interesting answer. What was that?
I did. I said, I always did not want to write a book. That's what I said. Yeah. Yet I come from long lines of people that really are more in the oral tradition. So, we could talk all night, but to do that, you'd actually have to talk. So the extent to which wisdom and knowledge and joking and recipes are shared is they're shared with people who are directly in front of you. And then those things are welcome to be shared again and again from person to person. So the notion that things would be written down and complete strangers would pick it up was actually not in the strategies that I had thought about. I understand the strategy. I understand the purpose of that. I had to take the risk to do that, given the ways in which, I have come to be who it is that I am right now.
I am delighted that you decided to write it down. I absolutely love a story and to talk into the morning, the additional communication that comes with body language and tone and facial expressions. But I also am very concerned that we write our story down lest it be told differently, or that it goes away or becomes erased. So I am happy that you were convinced to write something down. Tell me about the title, When No Thing Works.
Yes. So I actually had a different title in mind. So there's a story behind the title. And this is my first time writing something that would be published. So I've written other things before that I've given it to people that I know, right, that I've met. So this piece, and the way it works is, you send your manuscript to a publisher and they take a look. And the publisher came back to me, the editor came back to me with this particular title. And I had to think about it a lot. First of all, it has a second half, which I thought was so long. I wasn't sure how they're going to actually print it on the cover of a book. It says, a Zen and Indigenous perspective on resilience, shared purpose, and leadership in the time, place, of collapse. And, but I will say the title has grown on me, and here's why. It's grown on me because I gotten an inkling that people who pick it up, when they look at it, that it either meets them in terms of their current experience or it does not. And if it does not, they're not likely to open the book. And so therefore, this title actually is serving its purpose, right? It's serving its purpose. It's the notion of when no thing works is my observation that the world has become so polarized that no thing that is being put out into the world actually has a chance to fruit in a way that it can become something more and better of itself. And so instead, what we have is we have just a jumble of ideas, whether you're on the left or the right, that are fighting for primacy. And in that fight, that it just comes to a draw. And in that draw, it squeezes out the possibility of everything, irrespective of what part of the ideology you may come from. And it squeezes out even things that one side or the other would hope to be. And so then in that tight place, no thing works. But for me, it's about no thing, which is to say that it is about things versus about life, about humans, and about love. And so I believe that that which is living is still working and is trying mightily to just navigate the collapse. And in that is the possibility of what might come next, even if no thing works.
I think I get it a little more now. Yeah. In terms of the thing does not work, but love and joy and humans work. I get it. I'm delighted that I have more insight into this now. More insight. Yeah. I'm going to ponder on that a moment and go to my question. I'm on mute because the gardeners with the S have decided to make a lot of noise over here. Hopefully you all cannot hear, but I can. And ask you to speak to the notion of a far horizon and a near horizon or now.
Okay. So when you stand up or if you're sitting down And if you're holding yourself in your dignity, which means that your head isn't down, or staring up at the clouds, where if you stare up in the clouds, we may think we're in our dignity, but we're not really paying attention to anything. So if we're standing or sitting in our dignity, our eyes will meet a place where something will meet the sky. So it might be a building that meets the sky. It might be the grass that meets the sky. In my case, since I live on an island and I am in sight of the ocean, it is actually the ocean that is meeting the sky at that place that we call the horizon. But for every being, if you just look out, there will be that place where the earth as you will know it, or that you can see it, will meet the sky. They say that is the horizon. It has a name. That is the horizon. And it's a very interesting thing, that horizon. The way it works is, if you keep moving toward it, the horizon will move, right? And something else will unveil itself if you keep moving. So perhaps right now, because you're in an urban setting, the only thing you can see is buildings as far as you can see, and then there's the part where the last building that you can see is meeting the sky. But if you move down that boulevard, something else will emerge, and something else, and something else, and it's like that. Okay? And when I speak of horizon, it's important to understand the actual phenomena of that, as to why it is I speak of the horizon, which is to say, that place which you can describe that would be out there, and that if you move towards it, that what you see will become so. Right? That which you see will become so. And if we are to be good ancestors, then we need to actually have a notion of the world as we would want it to be, if the work that we're doing right now pays off. So if we just pay attention to the work we're doing right now, but we're not in our mind's eye, in our story, in our narrative, clear about, well, if it pays off, then what will the world be like? Then we won't be able to have a full picture, so to speak, right, about what it is we're working towards and what we're asking other people to work towards. And I refer to the far horizon as, being the thing that after a number of generations have gone by. And the reason why I say to pay attention to that horizon is that many of the things we're working on now will take time. And if we're only looking at the near horizon, say the next 10 years or so, then we will have smaller dreams. And smaller dreams, even if we work hard on them, will manifest in small ways, small gains, maybe a change in a law somewhere that, by the way, we can be proud about. But the implementation of that law, along with all the other social change work that would need to occur, including the creation of things that have not yet been born, are really important for us to play out. And those things play themselves out if we have a much bigger notion of what we believe is possible on the far horizon.
Couple of thoughts. Um, it this conversation makes me think about 7 generations in terms of some of the indigenous beliefs and planning for 7 generations to give room for the things that we have not yet thought, or the people who have not yet emerged, right? And how do we plant seeds and create the condition for that growth? But it also makes me think about that we are living in someone else's imagination. We're living in someone else's vision, and it wasn't for us. And not only was it not for us, it did not include us. One of my favorite nerd zones is Star Trek, and grew up watching Lieutenant Uhuru, which is that Swahili word for freedom, and watch her be in the future and in space. And I I would love to see us create those Lieutenant Uhurus for these generations that are coming now. And just wondering, like, ooh, how do we do that? Right? How do we give that inspiration for generations now to not live someone else's dream, but to imagine us in the future and us being in our power in the future. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. This is very much an indigenous perspective. And by, all of our peoples at one time were indigenous. If you're indigenous today, you can say that only because your indigeneity was interrupted in more recent history, in the last few hundred years.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone would have had a point in their time as humans when you're indigenous in which, remarkably, wherever it is that you were on the globe, there would be this notion of 7 generations. And I've come to think of that as, about 140, 150 years in either direction is about as far as humans could hold at any given point in time, about a 300-year spread, with your generation being in the middle of that. 140 years in one direction, 140 years in the other. Which is to say that it's an interesting thing to think that in non-modern times, that people had more foresight than in modern times, that they thought about what they needed to lay the ground for, that wherever they lived, if it was flooding every year, that it would be possible for it not to flood, or that they would need to migrate, right, in order to not be living in those conditions. And that whole peoples would undertake the thinking about that as a communal way in order to be in governance with each other, good governance with each other, right? Like, what would our mutual future be if I, the person who is an expert fisherman, understood that if we kept fishing in this river, that we would no longer have fish, and therefore we need to take some measures. Not that we need to fish everything out, right? And we would take measures that would ensure that generations pass and that we traded out in some ways sort of short-term prosperity for a longer-term vision of things. Now, this is not about moving back to ancient ways. It's about living in modern times and not forgetting ancient wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And so, yes, to have our peeps go into space, but not necessarily for the purposes of conquering,
Mm-hmm.
right, would be to move into modernity, but to take heed of ancient wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And for those ships not to just have only one kind of peoples on it, right, would mean that Mother Earth, right, would not be a concept, right, that is forgotten, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I believe that actually we have the muscle, but we've um, forgotten how to use it. And I'm not only talking about our ancestors. So every child, somewhere between the age of 2 and 7 or 8 years old, is extraordinarily curious about life. And it's like one of the first words they learn is why, right? They want to know why. And if they're not satisfied with an answer, they make up their own. And when they make up their own, it's frequently a much more complex story than maybe told by an adult, right? It's like they actually have a muscle. You actually have a muscle. Every child who is born, every generation has a muscle. And then we kind of leave it behind at some point. We age out of it. But that does not mean that it isn't still there and that it cannot be reignited in purposeful ways,
Mm-hmm.
not just in ways that will annoy our older parents, right? Like you're thinking, I can't wait for you to be able to look it up on Google, right? But it's like,
Oh, no.
no, it's like that curiosity about what may be possible if we are to live in ways in which we are more interdependent with each other, that we don't see the resolution of our conflicts as the extinction of the people we're in conflict with, that we wouldn't have the ego that we are righteous in our knowledge that anyone who thinks differently than us are an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
All those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's I believe actually that it's only a matter of relearning and reigniting. It's not about doing something that's entirely outside of our possibility.
Mm-hmm. Had a lot of thoughts. A lot of thoughts about that. And I wrote down some of the places. I think that there is old brain and new brain. And I think that in my observing children, like between that 2-year-old and that 8-year-old, that parents or adults do a lot to dampen, right? To if it's why that question, it's like, okay, I'm tired of answering that question, but I'm of that generation. Please don't ask Google. Right? Please don't let Google solve this conversation or solve this curiosity for you, because that to me also dampens some of that brain function. Right? When I think about my mom, and she knew everyone's phone number. I don't. because it's in my cell phone. I never had to memorize it and use those brain cells in that way for that thing. So I think that as a human species, we're doing a great deal to, I'm going to use this word because it actually popped into my head, to create extinction for ourselves. Mhm. And that is like super scary. But as we close down brain functions, right? As we close down uses of this whole mess that we never used all of it in the first place, right? Then that impacts that creativity, the dreaming ability, the imaginability. So we actually do only live in someone else's nightmare for right now. So then my question then becomes, ooh, how do we prevent that? How do we wake that up? How do we call on the ancient wisdom that may be dormant in our heads or perhaps in someone else's, but set aside that ego enough for us to awaken our own imagination and our own ability to vision and dream, that creates space for the next 7 generations, as opposed to for this generation, or as opposed to someone else's generation, someone else's existence, but not our own.
Well, no fancy equipment or uniforms or membership is needed for storytelling. Right? It's like, I think storytelling is short, whether it be short or long. My people are people of the long story. And so, if you get us started, we'd have to take several intermissions and maybe take a nap in between. But
Where you left off. Yeah.
There's, like the stories that, the story of the future is a purposeful story. And it's one that would help us figure out what kind of actions and what kind of strategies we need to undertake today. I believe that really fully. And I believe that and this is somewhat different than, the dependence on single visionaries. This is more the way in which stories would sit in the commons. And I'd say stories, but certainly many kinds of forms of art are generative in the ways that tell different aspects of story, right? So there's a story you tell, the story you hear, the one in which there are scenes that open up that other artists will depict, or perhaps a story that appears in the single crayon drawing, from which, many people will see many things.
Mm-hmm.
Doing it collectively rather than individually feels very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? It's because otherwise we just reinforce the neurosis of isolation that seems to be a pandemic even. And so the ways in which you might tell story in common cause, I can think of some recent movements where the story of the new emergent family, that family is not a word that it needs to be held hostage by one ideology or another, has been very, very useful. I think that where we have missed the boat is that we stop telling the story when we get the tactical win. Right. So it's like we tell the story for the purposes
we want.
Right.
Yeah.
We can move on, right?
Yeah.
And so
if this moment tells us anything, it's how really fragile a law might be if it's not accompanied by such significant social change that people of a place and a time are in fruitful implementation of what that law intends, irrespective of whether the law is being implemented by one set of leaders or another. Right? We're in a big, big test around that right now, but also a lot of evidence of cautionary messages around how we may have relied on certain ways that we're not filling in enough of the storyline for people, that they may see themselves in these stories. They might only have seen some people in them, and they might have interpreted that as it being in their at the price of their freedom, or the price of their life, or the price of their success, with or without evidence of that. There are ways that people can have that notion of being left out. Right? Every kindergarten teacher is paying attention to that in their classroom, right? About how that can happen, right? And for that not to happen takes a lot of work. And if this is going to be on a radio show, then I have to not say certain words, right? So, it's that if we are to be in a tight place, let us not only fight our way out.
I think we are in a tight, narrow space. But I do think, according to you, in this tunnel, there is light. Yeah. I know we are getting close to that hour point for us, and I want to leave space to talk about fire and the lessons we learned from fire. So there was a fire in Hawaii, on Maui.
Yes, in Maui.
Yeah, and there was a fire in Los Angeles, across a great deal of Los Angeles, Pasadena, Altadena, Pacific Palisades. What lessons do we learn from fire?
Well, we learn, and we continue to learn that, among other things, that we cannot take any of these large-scale fires as if they're outliers. As in, it should not have happened, and it would not have happened if we did X, Y, and Z. And another one will not happen. We cannot take...
Bible Blast thought that it happened.
That's right. We need to understand that the earth is suffering a lot and has been for some time. We haven't paid much attention to that. And that the fires are like they come upon perfect storms by things that are happening in nature, but also human-made hubris, mostly. Right? We learned that the best of human behaviors will arise when a fire occurs. That people will arise heroically and without a notion of their own self to be in service of others. And we take note that that happens more than the other behavior in the wake of a disaster. The other behaviors also arise. The ways in which people sweep in and try to buy the land cheaply to take advantage of other people's suffering. That also occurs. But more are people basically who are just trying to take care of each other. And that we still remember how to do that is a relief, actually, for me. That's something that we learned that that the time after a fire is among the easiest part of the fire because everything is immediate and must be taken care of immediately. And we either succeed or not, but that's the easiest part of the recovery. That there is a long tail to recovery. And, we'd say the people of Maui are still in that tail and will be in that tail for some time. The people of Altadena and, people in Palisades, the people who can still not return to their homes, even if they still have homes, because they are filled with the toxic waste stream of fires. That there's still going to be a long, long time of recovery. And so how we arise into this as not only the people who are immediately impacted, but the people who are in relationship, who care about that, who are in support of that, is a massive test for us. And of course, the collapse of the federal government right now is not helping that because we have a paradigm in this country that large-scale disaster, that actually the role of the federal government is an outsized role. And that role is now being questioned without deliberation. In other words, usually when you question the role of something, you are in deliberation around that before you make decisions about that. These decisions are being made by fiat rather than due consideration. Mm-hmm. And so it is as if you are pouring gasoline upon the aftermath of a disaster in terms of how that is playing itself out. Okay. Whether we like that or not, what that means is that the local response is even more important than it has been in even the near past. And how we all arise into it, what we care about matters a lot. What we care about matters a lot. So there are many, many, many lessons. Los Angeles has had a little bit of rain since the fires. I say a little bit because in Hawaii, the rain that has fallen in LA to us would be, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we, I understand, right? In a desert system, right? The rain that has fallen is a massive occurrence for a place like LA. Mm-hmm. But in that rain, among the ruins, that you would see growth, right? So grasses that are still going. Some gardens that had to be abandoned because they're no longer homes that were there, with that little bit of rain, have continued to grow, and those gardens are still there. And what all of that is a reminder is that in the rush to clear and to put concrete back on those places, we have to pay attention to the earth, and we have to have an aspiration for that earth that would mean that humans who come back to it will come to a place that is even more habitable, even more of a refuge than the place that was burned down. We need to take a step back, and we need to pay attention to that. Okay. The earth itself is trying mightily to tell us that. And so many lessons that fires have. The lesson that mutual care is a building block for future governance. It is not we did that because the government was not able to do that, and now that government is back, we'll stop doing that. When we recede, rather than build upon that which we know we can do, we fall into a dependent pattern rather than an interdependent pattern. And so if there is to be anything learned from a fire, it's the ways in which we hold each other should not be thought of as temporary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that. The ways in which we hold each other should not be thought as temporary. I have seen communities absolutely come together. And communities, there have been other wildfires in California where folks from those communities are sharing lessons with these new people who are dealing with this phenomenon of fire. There are so many lessons to learn. You can't fight fire alone. You need community to fight fire. And I think then the follow-up from that is, if you need community to fight fire, then that community should stay together. Should figure out, as you said, how to plant seeds and create governance different than government, that's interdependent as opposed to something different. How do you give back? I don't know if we are learning the lesson of pause and think sustainable as opposed to build back quick. And in some senses, I know folks now who are paying mortgage and rent, or are paying 2 rents. And that's not sustainable. So yes, they're thinking build back quick, not thinking, how do we build differently to create the refuge that you mentioned, to create the home that you mentioned, as to create something that is in opposition to earth, or that is a setup for the next fire, right? The next fire to come, because the rule is, if you don't learn the lesson, you must repeat it until you get it. And I'm not sure that we have moved to a space where we are learning the lesson, But I am hopeful that we are in a space where we are learning community and interdependence and working together locally and being not totally dependent on or expectant of a government that is not receiving direction or in relationship with us. So I'm looking forward to more people thinking about seeking forgiveness from earth and land, and thinking about how do we heal and work in collaboration or in partnership with this land, right? And hopefully those developers have been outed and now people get them, right? And I think that's it. So I am going to ask you, and first, I'm going to thank you so much for taking this time to talk with us. I absolutely appreciate your wisdom and your time and attention. And if there are any words you would like to say for this time, because there will be a next time. So now.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. I have so much gratitude for being here. My people have a dual thing, ha'aheo and ha'aha'a, pride and humility. Right? Proud to be here, humbled to be in your presence. I hope next time we might be able to share food.
Or in person, yes.
Yes. That would be great.
Thank you for tuning in to this special episode of I'm Just Saying, Two Black Women with Opinions. Norma Wong's insights on leadership, resilience, and being a good ancestor are truly inspiring. We hope this conversation sparks something powerful within you. Be sure to follow us on social media for more conversations like this. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Catch you in the next episode.